Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam, folks. I'm so excited today to be joined by my friend Chris Finch. Chris is a video coordinator with the Davidson Wildcats in Davidson, North Carolina. He works, of course, with the Wildcat Athletics. We both know each other from Virginia Tech. In fact, we had parallel, really, academic careers. Both graduated undergrad in 2019. Both graduated with their master's in 2021. Chris, of course, was involved in Hokie Vision, so an alumni of that prestigious program. And, of course, joining me now for the second straight year to talk about one of the most exciting times of the year, March Madness. Chris, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, thanks, Billy. I'm glad to be here for another year. I feel like a veteran at this point, and I appreciate the very warm welcome, and can't wait to get into it.
Yeah, you've been on the podcast several times now, and so I always appreciate that. But, before we get to March Madness, Chris, I want to talk about, how are things going at Davidson? And, it's like your second year there, so, you definitely got some more experience under your belt. But how's it been like at Davidson, and what are some things you're working on?
For sure. Davidson Video Services has grown tremendously this year from last year, and it's really thanks 100% to some great student help that we've gotten this year. We've hired 3 creative interns who just do a phenomenal job, 2 interns that are helping us out on the ESPN Plus side. And this spring, we have a couple of student athletes who are interested in what we do from a graphic design and social media standpoint that are also giving some of my colleagues a hand on the social media front. And all of that has helped us get to a point where we feel like we can do things like submit videos to the SVG Awards because we have a little bit more time now that we have some extra hands to spend some quality time on our product. And it's really cool kind of being the one of the people that kind of makes that whole train roll. It's a tremendous honor. I love it at Davidson, and I can't wait to see what we do for the rest of this year and going into next year.
And actually, the number one question I wanted to ask you more than any March Madness question we were going to talk about today is, you posted a picture on your Instagram of you meeting Steph Curry, maybe the most famous Davidson alum, of course. He's a Hall of Famer, future Hall of Famer, champion with the Warriors, 2-time MVP. But he came back to his alma mater, Davidson, to graduate. I don't know if you can explain the details, but obviously walked in the ceremony and you were able to grab a picture with him. I mean, just tell me about what that experience was like to be able to meet one of the greatest NBA players of all time.
Yeah, that was a really special day. So the day was titled Curry for 3. So he was coming to get his jersey hung in the rafters to be inducted into the Davidson Athletics Hall of Fame. And the rule basically is at Davidson, you can't have your jersey retired unless you are a graduate. So he had to graduate. So he got his degree while winning another NBA Finals, which is phenomenal. He got his jersey retired, was inducted into the Hall of Fame, all of that. And he had to wait somewhere for about 15 minutes. That was kind of out of view of everybody else. So he could kind of come in, get his cap and gown, all that stuff. And that happened to be in our public office space. So I'm sitting at my desk and I look up and walks one of the greatest NBA players of all time. So my boss was like, "Oh, this is Finch. He's a Hokie." And he gave me a couple nods and said respect, and had a very, very short conversation. He is as laid back in those sort of situations as he is like in his press conferences where he's kind of slumped down and he's kind of given, just very calm, laid back type of answers. He's a fun guy, and he is exactly how you would picture him to be in real life. It was a really cool experience, and I'm really lucky to have been a part of it.
And of course, yeah, I mean, you have that picture forever. So definitely a great memory there. Well, let's get right to it, Chris. I mean, the reason why you're on here is to talk about March Madness. Hard to believe as of this recording, the tournament starts tomorrow at 12 p.m. Of course, we've already had first 4 games, and those have been exciting already. So just a great time of the year. I guess before we get to this year's specific bracket and talk about our picks and all of that, I wanted to ask you, for someone who, may not necessarily be familiar with March Madness, how would you describe to them how special this time of year is? I mean, what makes this tournament and these next couple of weeks, end of March, early April, one of the most special times of the year as a sports fan?
It's really great that I ended up at Davidson, because one of my first March Madness memories was watching Davidson as a 10 seed led by Steph Curry go all the way to the Elite Eight, and they were a made basket away from knocking off the eventual national champion Kansas Jayhawks. I think the parity in March and the anybody can beat anybody-ness of the NCAA tournament is something that really rivals a lot of other postseason tournaments. You see a lot of NBA playoffs and the college football playoff where generally your top seeds are going to win. There's not a whole lot of 8 seeds in the NBA playoffs knocking off the 1 seed in a 7-game series. And I think that's the other exciting thing about March Madness is it's really tough to be an 8 seed in the NBA playoffs and knock out a 1 seed because you got to beat them 4 times. Whereas a lot of these 14, 15, 16 seeds, when they're preparing for their games, they're telling their players, look, if I'm TAMU Corpus Christi, I don't have to be better than Alabama 99 times out of 100. I just got to do it on March 16th or 17th. I'm not sure if they're a Thursday or Friday game, but you get the idea. And I think that's what makes it a really special time of the year.
I agree with you. I think it's also so cool to see people's alma maters get involved. I mean, I think that's kind of why we have such a special connection to college sports, is because a lot of times we see our alma maters or the schools where we went being involved. And I think that you have a more direct connection to your college than you would to, an NBA team. I mean, we can be Wizards fans, but we'll never play for the Wizards. So it's just a different level of connection and affiliation and love that you have for your alma mater. Well, let's get right to it then, to this bracket, Chris. I mean, so many great storylines to talk about with March Madness. I took a look first at the multiple bids breakdown in terms of which conferences got multiple bids. You have 8 teams in the ACC made it. That's tied with the Big Ten for the most, who also had 8. 7 teams from the Big 12. ACC had 5 teams. The Big East had 5 teams as well. Pac-12 and Mountain West had 4. West Coast Conference 2 and the American Conference 2. You look at the best odds, betting odds to win the championship. You've got Houston at plus 500. Of course, the Final Four is in Houston. It's also Jim Nantz's last Final Four. He went to Houston, so we'll see if that kind of fairy tale ending ends up happening for him. Alabama, who would have thought, we'd be talking about them as a basketball school, but they're plus 650, according to Bovada. Kansas, the defending champion, plus 1,000. Purdue, plus 1,200. UCLA, plus 1,400. Arizona, plus 1,500. And Texas, plus 1,500. So a lot of great storylines, of course, going into the tournament. Chris, what are you most looking forward to here before we start making our picks in the bracket?
I think this year, I think I might have said this last year, but there's more parity than ever in this year's tournament. And I think what also is awesome is you have a couple of new faces that are at the top of the line. Like, how about Marquette and the job that Shaka Smart did over there this year? How about Alabama kind of shaking off some controversial off the court matters to propel themselves up to the number 1 overall seed? And then you have your Purdue Boilermakers too. They have a really young backcourt getting up there. So we have some new fresh faces that are kind of running the tournament this year, and it's going to be exciting to see what happens.
I agree with you in terms of the parity perspective. I mean, if you look at, Chris, a lot of these 1 and 2 seeds, they've never won a national championship. Alabama's never won a national championship. Houston has never won a national championship. Purdue hasn't won. Texas, as a number 2 seed, hasn't won. Arizona hasn't won in forever, and so on and so forth. UCLA hasn't won in forever. So, I think you just look at it a lot of times, because typically, more than likely, one of these top seeds is probably, statistically, probably going to win the whole thing. It's just cool to see how, they just haven't had a lot of historical success. So I think it's going to make their fan bases more energized for them as they go into this tournament. So very excited to see what happens. Well, Chris, let's get right to it then. Let's put our money where our mouth is and make these picks. So I think what we'll do here is we'll go by region. So we'll go through the South region, then the Midwest region, et cetera, et cetera. We'll just do a quick who you think is going to win. And then once we've kind of done with the bracket, part of the region, I should say, part of that bracket in terms of who advances to the Final Four, then we'll kind of have a broader discussion on what we think what we think about the bracket and what are some key storylines. So first, Chris, let's go to the South region. We've got Alabama versus Texas A&M CC. I would be shocked if you have a upset here.
Yeah, no upset here. Let's go Roll Tide.
Yeah, I'm going with the Tide as well. Keep in mind, the only time in history that a 16 seed has upset a 1, we were both fans of it in 2018 when UMBC upset UVA, our hated rival as Hokie alum. So we definitely love to see that. But both of us going the Tide here. Next up, we've got 8-9, Maryland and West Virginia.
I have Maryland advancing. No crazy analysis here. Just I grew up rooting for Maryland, and I really don't like West Virginia as a Virginia Tech fan. So,
for sure, I'm a big fan of a guy you know as well, Johnny Holiday, who's a former Nationals broadcaster. He's the voice of the Terps. he's getting up there in his 80s. Not sure how long he's gonna keep doing it, but I'm picking Maryland to advance to the second round. Next up, we have San Diego State and COFC. Who do you think is gonna win this matchup?
Yeah, Charleston, one of the better mid-major teams in America, kind of got they got a really tough draw here with San Diego State. Charleston can really shoot the lights out, but I think San Diego's 3-point defense is going to prevail here. I got them advancing.
I also will go with San Diego State as well. So we're 3 for 3 here in terms of agreement. Here's a potential matchup that a lot of people are saying could have upset implications. UVA at number 4 against number 13 Furman, another school from South Carolina. What do you think here, Chris? Do you think Furman has what it takes to upset UVA?
I don't, honestly. NC State, a team that a lot of people said probably shouldn't be in the tournament, beat Furman by 19 rather handily earlier in the year. I know it's March, but I'm going to go with Virginia in this one.
I'm going with Furman as my first upset pick here. I just think, Chris, and you know this as well, having followed AC basketball, UVA has always had a problem struggling to score. I mean, you saw it in the AC championship game. It seemed like for stretches. And I think it's surprising that Duke was able to didn't really blow him out in terms of really pull away from him. But UVA just went through stretches of not being able to score. I don't think they really have had a guy since DeAndre Hunter from a few years ago who can really just get you a bucket when everything else is stalling and you just need something on offense. I think Furman has what it takes to upset the Cougs, so I am going with Furman there in the upset. And next we have Creighton and NC State, 6 and 11. Statistically speaking, 11 over 6 is the most likely upset. Of course, we know NC State from the ACC. Creighton under Doug McDermott has been a perennial NCAA contender, it seems like. So what do you think about this? Do you think NC State could upset Creighton?
I think they could, but I think Creighton, they're a very deep team, and I think that there were a lot of alarm bells sounding when they lost 6 straight earlier in the year, but I think they've righted the ship. I've actually got Creighton advancing pretty deep in this tournament. I like them in this game.
I'm going with NC State. I feel like the ACC, even though they seem to sometimes not get the respect that they deserve going into the tournament last couple of years, they've actually surprised people with the amount of deep runs they've had from their teams. So I'm going with NC State. I don't know if it'll be a Jim Valvano 1983 cardiac pack Cinderella run, but I am going with NC State here to advance to the round of 32. Next up in the 3-14 region, we've got Baylor, who was the champion 2 years ago, taking on UCSB, I should say. Who do you think ends up winning this matchup, 3 versus 14?
I like the Baylor Bears in this matchup. The UCSB has not played a quad 1 team all year. Very good very good throughout the regular season and in their conference championship, but just not a battle-tested team that I can be confident in. I've got the Bears advancing.
I will also have the Bears advancing. Scott Drew, he's one of the best coaches in the game. Of course, he's won a championship. I didn't like how they ended the Big 12 tournament, getting blown out the way they did against Texas, but I think they'll have enough to get it done here in the first round. So we both agree on Baylor there. Next up, we have Missouri and USU in the 7-10 matchup. Who do you have winning in that matchup?
I have USU in an upset. I think Missouri, although they're a very good team offensively, I think they're going to really struggle defensively against Utah State, and got to have at least one upset in this region. So that's I'll pick that.
Well, I already had my upset with Furman over UVA, so I'm going with Missouri. The SEC has 8 teams, of course, like we talked about in this tournament. I think they're going to show why they had the most teams because, their conference was pretty deep this year. I picked Mizzou to beat Utah State. And then we have the 2-15 matchup, Arizona and Princeton. Last couple of years, Chris, there has been a 15 upsetting a 2. Last year, we all remember St. Peter's doing that to Kentucky. Do you think Princeton has what it takes to upset Arizona?
I don't think there's going to be any Ivy magic in this one this year. Arizona is a pretty hot team right now coming out of the Pac-12 tournament with a win. Got Arizona advancing to the next round.
I agree with you. I'm not sold on Arizona in terms of making a deep run to the Final Four because of the way they played at the end of the season, but I do think they're able to get it done against Princeton here, and they will advance to the round of 32. So there you go for the round of 64 in the South region. Me and Chris seem to have a lot of agreement early on in this bracket. If you look at the round of 32 potential matchup that we would have, it would be Alabama and Maryland. Who do you have advancing between those two schools?
Once again, I have Alabama. I just think they're a little bit too talented, a little bit too deep, a little bit more disciplined, well coached. I think they'll advance.
I agree with you. Alabama's got a top 5 lottery pick in Brandon Miller. I think he's going to have a big tournament, and I will pick the Roll Tide to advance to the Sweet 16. I believe for the San Diego State, you had San Diego State UVA, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, yep, that's what I got.
And who do you have advancing?
I have Virginia advancing one more round. San Diego State ranks in the 200ths in effective field goal percentage, and it's really tough to score against that pack line defense, especially if you don't play it too often. I got Virginia advancing one more round.
I have San Diego State and Furman. I think Furman's run ends here. San Diego State will overpower them as a 5 seed against the 13. I have San Diego State advancing to the Sweet 16. In the next matchup, we both had Baylor, and who did you have in terms of Creighton, NC State, and who do you have advancing?
I had Creighton advancing, and I have Creighton advancing again over Baylor. Once again, Baylor, a not great defensive team. I think that Creighton has a little bit wider breadth of scoring. They're a little bit deeper, and I think that they will be able to outshoot the Bears on offense and score enough to get the win.
I am going with Baylor over NC State in my matchup. I really like Keontae George. I think he's one of the best players in the country. You know, it really seems like every tournament you've got a couple of guys. We all remember Kemba Walker back in 2011, I think it was. They just have a special run in this tournament. We mentioned Brandon Miller earlier. I think Keontae George is another guy that could have that type of tournament. I am picking Baylor to advance to the Sweet 16. And then in the last matchup of the round of 32 in this region, I think we both had Arizona and Missouri. Who do you have advancing the Sweet 16?
I've got Utah State advancing, but they're gonna lose to Arizona. Arizona goes to the Sweet 16. Big thing here, Arizona has 2 players that have drilled a number of threes this year. Courtney Ramey, Cariza, and Utah State is one of the worst defensive 3-point shooting teams in America. So that being said, have the Wildcats advancing to the Sweet 16.
That shows you. I mean, if you don't pay attention, it's so hard to keep track of so many picks. So, thanks for reminding us. You picked Utah State. I had Arizona and Missouri. I am going with Arizona to make it to the Sweet 16. I think they've got enough there to get through another round. So there you go. As we now go to the Sweet 16, I believe you had Alabama and UVA, if I'm not mistaken. Who do you have advancing to the Elite Eight?
I have Alabama advancing. You alluded to Brandon Miller earlier in your picks, and I think that's where he's just going to be able to overpower the Hoos and kind of end that little run that they've made throughout the tournament so far.
I had Alabama, San Diego State. Alabama will advance to the Elite Eight. Not much else to say there. So then in the other Sweet 16 matchup, who did you have in that matchup, and who do you have advancing?
I like Creighton to continue to make a Cinderella run. I'm really high on these guys out of the Big East, and I'm really high on how they're coached. And I'm also a little bit down on Arizona, despite winning the Pac-12 tournament. They've shown that they've been a little bit shaky throughout the year so far, particularly in the month of February. So I think Creighton, a little bit more consistency. I think that they'll advance in the Elite Eight.
I had Baylor and Arizona. I am going with Baylor, the 3 seed, to advance to the Elite Eight. I think this is where coaching is going to come into play. I mean, Tommy Lloyd, a relatively young coach, and he's only been there a few years, whereas Scott Drew has won a championship. I think, we tend to see as you get deeper into this tournament, coaching matters, and I think Scott Drew will have the advantage there to get the Golden Bears to the Elite Eight. So in your Elite Eight, Chris, a little bit of a surprise. I believe you have Alabama and Creighton in the South region. Who do you have? Do you think Creighton has the chance to continue the Cinderella run, or you got Alabama ending it right here?
I've got Alabama ending it right there. I think they've shown that they've been able to shake off their off the court issues this year. And I think that's just going to continue with the absolutely loaded and deep roster that they have. Cinderella run ends for Creighton in the Elite Eight.
I had Alabama and Baylor. I am going with Alabama. I think they've been the best team in college basketball all year. Baylor, like we've talked about, has been inconsistent. I mean, they got blown out by Texas in the Big 12 tournament. I didn't like how they ended their season. I don't know that this region is that weak in terms of, I think Baylor has an ability to kind of get through it, I think, but running against Alabama is a different type of animal. I am going with the Tide to make it to the Final Four. So there you go in the South region. After all those picks, both Chris and I agree Alabama, the number 1 overall seed, will get to the Final Four. As you look at this region, Chris, I mean, what do you think about it? Is there any storylines that stand out to you, or pretty straightforward? You think Alabama's probably going to make it out to Houston?
I feel like it's a pretty straightforward path for Alabama. I think they match up well against the teams that they could potentially play against. I think as somebody who works for a mid-major school, I'm always going to be looking at the mid-majors a little bit closely. And I was really excited to see where Charleston was going to end up. I was really disappointed to see that they were matched up against a team like San Diego State. Charleston is a team that loves to score, and they love to score from beyond the arc. And they were matched up against a team in San Diego State, one of the best three-point defenses in their conference. A tough draw for Charleston. But I still think Charleston can upset SDSU, and I think Furman, I didn't pick it in my bracket, I know you picked it in yours, can easily upset the Hoos.
Yeah, I just thought Alabama, I mean, just eyeballing the bracket right now, I kind of feel like they have, quote unquote, the easiest path to the Final Four of all the 1 seeds. I think Arizona is not as strong of a 2 seed as, say, the other 2 seeds are in the other regions. And you looked at it, I mean, like I said, I don't like the way Arizona played to close out the season. I mean, I watched that Arizona State game live when the Spartans hit a half-court buzzer beater to beat the Wildcats on the road. And you look at that UCLA Pac-12 game, Pac-12 championship, Arizona only beat them by like 3 points, and UCLA was missing 2 of their starters. So I think that shows you that Arizona is kind of coming into this tournament a little bit on a shaky foot. They got a 2 seed, well-deserved, because they won the tournament, but I just think overall, you look at Alabama's path, I don't think it's as difficult as the other 1 seed. So that's why I have Alabama advancing. So there you go. We both agree there. Let's now move to the Midwest region, where Houston, again, we talked about it, Houston is the site of the Final Four. So the Cougars are trying to play in their home site this year in a couple weeks in April. We'll go, of course, to that first matchup of the 1-16, Houston, Northern Kentucky. I have Houston advancing. How about you?
Houston advances.
Yeah, not much else to say there. Pretty good 8-9 matchup. I mean, 2 teams from 2 conferences that, like I said, have the most representation in the tournament. Iowa and Auburn. Who do you have advancing?
I've got Iowa led by Chris Murray advancing to the second round. I think their scoring will overpower Auburn, despite having a very veteran lineup, 5 starters, all upperclassmen for the Tigers. But I think Iowa advances.
I'm going with the Tigers. I mean, Bruce Pearlie's been in this tournament a few times. We all remember when they got robbed against UVA. They should have been in the final that year and not the Hoos. So I think Auburn has what it takes to beat Iowa. I mean, Alabama is number 1. I'm kind of feeling a little bit of Alabama flavor, so I am picking Auburn to advance to the round of 32. We have Miami and Drake, the 5-12. Miami was the regular season ACC champion. Of course, they lost to Duke in the tournament, so didn't end the tournament on the way they wanted to. But Drake has been a formidable opponent in their conference all year. 12-5. Do you think it happens, or do you think Miami advances?
I think this is my favorite 12-5, and I think it's because Drake has a very veteran lineup. The average age of their starting lineup is over 23 years old. It's really tough for me to pick against Jim Larrañaga in March, but I also think that I think the Players Tribune released a video where Miami's like, oh yeah, pick against us and stuff like that. I think that maybe might be the kiss of death a little bit. I got Drake advancing in an upset.
Wow. Okay. I am going with Miami. Like you talked about, Jim Larrañaga knows how to coach in March. Both of us being from the Northern Virginia area, we remember in 2006 when he led GMU to the Final Four. So I've always had a soft spot for Jim Larrañaga, even as a Hokie fan. I will pick the Hurricanes to advance to the round of 32. In the next matchup, we have Kent State against Indiana University. Of course, Indiana, led by Mike Woodson, who was an NBA coach for many years. He played at IU when he was brought back to the Hoosiers. People saw that as a connection, kind of trying to reach back out to Bobby Knight. So he's in the tournament, and Indiana's a 4 seed for this year's bracket. Who do you think advances to the round of 32 between Indiana and Kent State?
I think Indiana's going to advance. I think that this is a pretty good game. Kent State holds teams to only 30% shooting from 3. They're a pretty good defensive team, but I think Indiana's going to run and gun them, and they're able to advance to play Drake in the next round.
I agree with you. I'm going with Indiana. I didn't like how they finished out the tournament, losing to Penn State, who was a 10 seed who made it all the way to the Big Ten final But, the way they played against Purdue, I believe they swept them, I think, if I'm not mistaken, including beating them at Purdue 79-71. I remember watching that game early on in the season. I like Indiana to advance to the round of 32 here. And then in the 6-11 matchup, we have ISU and Pitt. Pitt won their first 4 game last night, so they are in the tournament for real. Who do you have winning between Iowa State and Pittsburgh?
I'm going to put my ACC bias aside. I think Pitt went into the NCAA tournament on a really shaky foot. They got blasted by Duke in the ACC tournament and just did not look great at all. I think Iowa State will advance off a pretty wounded-looking Pittsburgh team.
I'm going with Pittsburgh. I think the fact that they played in the first 4-1 means they're coming in with a chip on their shoulder. They have game experience, which you can never substitute for. So I think Iowa State's going to come in a little bit rusty. Pitt will have played 48 hours before the game. I'm going with Pitt in the upset from the first 4 to the round of 32. And then we also have Xavier in their 14 matchup against, I believe it's Kennesaw State. Which one is sometimes with these tournaments, you don't even know half these colleges, it seems like. But who do you have advancing in the
Kennesaw State.
matchup? Yep. So who do you have advancing between these two?
Yeah, I've got Xavier. Xavier's one of the best 3-point shooting teams in America, and I love 3-point shooting teams when I pick these March Madness bracket absolute flamethrowers. I got Xavier advancing.
I didn't even know. I wasn't 100% sure it was Kennesaw State, so that shows you I will not be picking them against Xavier. I am going with the 3-seeded Xavier to advance to the round of 32. We're both pretty familiar with both of these two teams. This next matchup, 7 and 10, Penn State. I just mentioned them a minute ago. Had a kind of a little bit of a nice run to the Big Ten tournament final. Lost to Purdue, but played them very tough till the end against former Hokies coach Buzz Williams and Texas A&M. Texas A&M finished second in the SEC regular season, and then they lost to Alabama in the SEC tournament final. It kind of seems like, Chris, they're being a little bit underrated because, like I said, they finished second in both the regular season and the tournament to the number 1 overall seed in Alabama. But what do you think here? Do you think Buzz can lead Texas A&M, which, by the way, it's his first NCAA appearance with Texas A&M? Can he lead them to the second round?
See, Texas A&M was the first team out of last year's tournament. And I remember Buzz, after an NIT game, went to the press conference and basically was just listing off all these credentials about why they should have been in. I think Texas A&M is going to be a little bit PO'd. They're going to have a chip on their shoulder, and I think they're going to advance. Despite Penn State making a very memorable run, I think they'll advance to the next round.
I agree with you. I like the A&M Aggies to advance to the second round, like you talked about. I mean, remember when Buzz did that last year, people were like, oh, it's kind of like a congressional testimony with how long he went. Certainly, has his critics, but I think, A&M will be fired up to play in the NCAA tournament. Again, I am going with the Aggies to advance over Penn State. And then in the 2-15 matchup, we've got Texas and Colgate. Who do you have advancing from that matchup?
I think if there's 1-15/2 that could possibly happen, it would probably be here. I'm not going to pick it. I think Texas is a little bit too talented, but Colgate shoots 41% as a team. If that's not tops in the nation, I believe it's very close from beyond the arc. So I think got Texas advancing, but I think this game is going to be closer than a lot of people think.
I am going with the Longhorns. I think they're just coming into the tournament on a hot note. They blew out Kansas by 20 points in the Big 12 tournament championship. They also beat Baylor as well. So they're coming in on a hot note. I think Colgate will be no match for them there. So there you go. As we advance to the round of 32, Chris, I believe you had Houston and Iowa. Who do you have advancing to the Sweet 16 rather?
I've got the Cougars advancing again. They've made deep tournament runs each of the last couple of years. They're kind of a mainstay in the Sweet 16 and beyond. I think they'll advance over the Hawkeyes.
I agree with you. I am also going with Houston. I worry sometimes about their ability to score, because they lost to Memphis in the AAC tournament final. But I think they'll be able to get it done against Auburn. I had Auburn beating Iowa, but I will have Houston beating Auburn in the round of 32. And the next matchup, I believe you had Drake and IU. So who do you have advancing from that matchup?
This is where a double-digit team always makes the Sweet 16. I've got Drake advancing over Indiana. Indiana, a little bit of a shaky end of the year. I think Drake, veteran lineup, will be able to advance, and they'll be my double-digit Sweet 16 representative.
I have Miami and Indiana. I will go with Indiana. I think they're just playing a little bit better right now. Mike Woodson is really motivated the guys. Indiana really hasn't made a deep NCAA tournament run in years. I think they'll be excited to try to do that this year. I am going with the Hoosiers over the Hurricanes. And then in the next matchup, who did you have between, I believe you had Xavier advancing. Who was their opponent, and who do you have advancing to the Sweet 16?
So I had Xavier, Iowa State. And once again, I'm going to pick Xavier to advance. Their 3-point shooting offense is going to I think they're going to outshoot Iowa State. They're going to overpower them offensively a little bit, and it's going to be enough to get them to win.
I have Xavier and Pitt. I will go with Xavier here to advance to the Sweet 16. I think, Pittsburgh, they'll have a nice run to the round of 32, but I think their luck runs out on them there. Musketeers advance to the Sweet 16. Our final round of 32 matchup in this region, I believe we both had a all-Texas matchup, Texas A&M against Texas. Who will be the better Texas school in this matchup?
Yeah, big rivalry game. I do think that Texas is going to get bounced by A&M here. A&M, just after last year, gives me sort of this team of destiny vibe. And I think that they were massively underseeded, 7 seed. I think that they're going to wake some people up, and I think people are going to realize, maybe we should have seeded them higher.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I am going with Texas to advance. I think it'll be an all-time great matchup, but I just think Texas has a little bit more talent. I like their guards, guys like Marcus Carr, Tyrese Hunter, to play a little bit more consistently in this matchup. I am going with the Longhorns to advance to the Sweet 16. And in the Sweet 16 matchup, I believe, Chris, you at least had Houston. And then who do you have Houston playing in the Sweet 16?
Houston and Drake. Drake being my Cinderella team this year.
Who do you have advancing?
But unfortunately for Drake, it all comes crashing down as Houston will win in dominating fashion.
I was about to say, I mean, if you picked Drake, I really would have questioned what you've been drinking before this podcast. But I have Houston and Indiana. Of course, it would be a matchup of two respected coaches in Kelvin Sampson and Mike Woodson. Like you talked about, Houston has the experience playing deep into the tournament the last couple of years. I will pick Houston to advance to the Elite Eight. In the other matchup, who did you have between A&M and then who was your other opponent? And then who do you have advancing from that matchup?
So I got Xavier and Texas A&M, and I think Texas A&M is going to play a little bit of bully ball with Xavier. Xavier, pretty good offensively, a little bit softer defensively. I think Buzz Williams will be able to exploit that and get to the Elite Eight to play the Cougs.
I have Texas and Xavier. People forget Xavier's head coach is Sean Miller. I mean, he was with Arizona for a long time. Actually, it's the second stint at Xavier because he was at Xavier, then went to Arizona, and the Wildcats under his tenure made a number of Elite Eight runs. Obviously, he was unceremoniously fired for some controversial stuff that was happening off the field. But that being said, I believe in Texas. This will be a common theme here. I think they have what it takes to beat Xavier. So I have Texas advancing to the Elite Eight. So in our Elite Eight matchups, we both have one half the teams and the same state, but just different schools. You have Houston and Texas A&M. Actually, really, all three teams we're talking about here would be from the state of Texas. But between the Cougars and the Aggies, who do you have going to the Final Four?
I've got the Cougars going back to the Final Four. I think Houston has been one of the more consistent teams in America this year. And I just think that they've got a lot of firepower in their front court. And I think that they're going to be able to outbully the A&M front court enough to get them to win over Texas A&M. I think it'll be a good run for the Aggies. I think they got a lot of potential, but I've got Houston advancing to the Final Four.
I have Houston and Texas, and I am going with the Longhorns to make the Final Four. I just think, you look at the conference play. I think that's important to look at. I mean, who are you playing at conference-wise? I know the Big 12 didn't have the most teams make the tournament, but I just think from top to bottom, I think they have the best conference, especially the last couple of years in college basketball. I am picking Texas 2-1 to make the Final Four. So there you go. We both disagree on the Midwest region. I am going with Texas. Chris is going with Houston. Let's now move to the East region. Well, I guess before we do that, Chris, any last thoughts you have on Midwest in terms of any big storylines beyond what you've already talked about here with making your picks?
I think that there are so many sneaky teams that can topple Houston and make a run, even though I have Houston advancing. I think can't really sleep on Miami. You can't really sleep on Indiana. Xavier's great offensively. Even Texas A&M, like I said, they give me kind of Team of Destiny vibes. I think this is going to be a very competitive region. I'm going to be excited to watch the games that come out of this, because other than the 116, I'm not really seeing any games where I think one team is going to blow another team away.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I actually think this might be the toughest region. I mean, again, just eyeballing the bracket, because like you talked about, I mean, I think a lot of these like middle tier seeds can really have played some really good basketball and maybe knock out a few favorites in this tournament. I mean, you look at it, Iowa, Auburn, Miami, Indiana, although they're a 4 seed, but Iowa State, Pitt. I mean, just a lot of, I think, really experienced Power 5 conference schools in this region. So I think Houston probably has the toughest path to a Final Four, I think, if you look at all the 1 seeds. But again, a great discussion on that region. Let's go to the East, where Purdue is the number 1 seed. They will play the winner of Texas Southern and FDU. Do you have one of those teams advancing over Purdue, rather?
Nope. Give me Zach Edey all day. He's going to eat him alive.
Yeah, I'm going with Purdue. Yeah, there's really not much else to say there. We both now look at the 8-9 matchup in this region, Memphis and FAU. Who advances out of this matchup?
I've got FAU. FAU is a 30-win team. And for a mid-major, they're fairly battle tested. Memphis is, coming out of the American, a good team, but I got FAU a little bit more consistent this year, I think.
I am going with Memphis. I really like how they played in the AAC. Of course, beating Houston, which they were, of course, an underdog. Going into that game, I really like the job Penny Hardaway has done in his 2 years at Memphis. I am going with Memphis to advance over FAU. This is an interesting matchup here. Duke and Oral Roberts. We all remember a few years ago when Oral Roberts, as a 15 seed, upset Ohio State in the first round of the tournament. Duke has been pretty impressive. I mean, in the first year under John Shire, after legendary coach Mike Krzyzewski's retirement, they really didn't start out the season playing great, but they've caught on. I think they've won 9 straight games. They won the ACC tournament in Shire's first year. John Filipowski is one of the, I think, preeminent freshmen in college basketball. Do you think Oral Roberts pulls off another upset, or do you like Duke to advance to the round of 32?
This is a really intriguing matchup because Oral Roberts is also entering this game with a 17-game winning streak. So you have two red-hot teams in this matchup. I think John Shire's figured it out, though. I've got Duke advancing, another intriguing 5-12, but I think I've got Duke. I just really like the way that they played in the ACC tournament.
I'm going with Duke. Sneak peek, I think that they're going to be going far in this tournament, but I'll leave that for later. So we both agree there. We'll now go to Tennessee and UL. Who do you have advancing in this 4-13 matchup?
I think UL may have been a little bit overseeded as a 13. I think Tennessee is very good. I got them advancing.
Yeah, I also have Tennessee advancing over Louisiana Lafayette. I think they just have more experience, and as a Power 5 conference, I think they'll be able to get it done. Let's now move to the 6-11 matchup, maybe potentially the best 6-11 matchup of the 4, when you've got obviously the University of Kentucky, John Calipari facing Ed Cooley and Providence, 2 coaches who have been there and done that in this tournament. John Calipari, though, I mean, people talk about all these great coaches. He has not been able to win another championship since he did over 10 years ago with guys like Anthony Davis. And, of course, we all remember, like we talked about a little bit earlier in the podcast, they got upset by St. Peter's last year, 15-2. Do you think Kentucky comes a little bit more focused this year, or Providence is able to upset them in this matchup?
I think this is another intriguing one because Providence, Bryce Hopkins played for Kentucky last year and then goes to Providence and absolutely lights it up this year. I think Kentucky will win in a close one. But like you said, I think this is a 6-11 that can absolutely go either way.
And I am going the other way with Providence. I've been a big fan of Ed Cooley. I've actually picked Providence in a couple of tournaments, so I've kind of become a little bit of a fan of them come March Madness time. So I am going with Providence to upset Kentucky here, go to the second round. And then in the next matchup, 3-14, we got Kansas State against MTST. Who do you have advancing in this matchup?
I've got Kansas State. I don't honestly know too much about Montana State in their conference, but I've heard like friends of mine who are fans of mid-majors say a lot of good things, but if I don't know too much about them, I'm going to pick the tried and true Power 5 team.
Yeah, I mean, Montana is a state I probably never want to visit. I think it's just, I don't know what, I mean, look, if anyone listening is from Montana, no offense, but it's just not my kind of, I'm not a rural guy. I like the urban areas. Blacksburg is about as rural as I can be. I'm going with Kansas State to advance to the round of 32. How about this next matchup, Chris? Michigan State and USC, two, pretty prestigious programs who are, of course, kind of in the middle seating wise. Michigan State led by Tom Izzo. USC, of course, plays in the Pac-12. Who do you have advancing in this 7-10 matchup? If I remember correctly, you saw Michigan State last year when they played Davidson.
Yep. I pulled an interesting stat before this podcast where like the Big Ten as a 7 seed is like 41-1 or something crazy like that. Yeah, Michigan State as a 7 seed last year broke my 10th seeded Davidson Wildcats hearts in the second half with a late surge after the under 4 timeout. I got the Spartans advancing again.
I also have the Spartans advancing. I think if I'm not mistaken, now that you bring up that 7 seed stat, I believe in 2015 when Izzo made the Final Four, he was a 7 seed. So I like the Spartans to do some big things, and it's always that quote that John Rothstein talks about where he lists the months of the year and he says January, February, Izzo, April, et cetera, et cetera. It shows you the reputation Tom Izzo has of making deep runs in this tournament. And then we have Marquette, like we talked about earlier, facing UVM. Of course, Marquette led by Shaka Smart, a guy who's been a respected coach in college basketball. Do you think 2 advances over 15 here?
I do think 2 advances over 15. I think Vermont's a fun story out of the American East every year, but I just don't know if they have the talent to really knock off a big dog like that.
I am going with Marquette. Not much else to say there. Let's now go to the round of 32. Purdue and FAU for you. Do you have Purdue going to the Sweet 16?
Yes, I do. I think despite the 30-win season from FAU, I think Purdue is going to be able to out-talent FAU in advance.
I'm going with Purdue. They got Zach Edey, the best big man in college basketball, so they're going to the Sweet 16. I had Duke and Tennessee in my matchup. Who did you have in yours?
Yep, same here. Yep.
And who do you have advancing?
I got the ACC representative Duke. I think that they're a team that can really make a deep run in this tournament. I think that I think a lot of people were maybe expecting them to be a 3 or a 4 down here at the 5 with a lot to prove. And like I said earlier, I think John Shire may have figured it out.
I am also agreeing with you there. I am going with Duke. Next matchup, you had Kentucky and Kansas State. I remember these 2 teams played a couple years ago, and that was a pretty thrilling overtime game. Who do you have advancing in this matchup?
I like Kansas State, not so much for the Kansas State, more so of John Calipari in March, like you alluded to previously, hasn't been as impressive as he has been when they were winning natties. Like you said, 10 years ago when they had AD and everybody. Tough scenes for Cat Country in March. I think Kansas State's going to continue to humble Kentucky fans a little bit.
I am going with Providence over Kansas State. Reason being, I try to pick 1 or 2 Cinderellas, like I'm sure you do, to make a deep run, like you did with Creighton earlier. And Drake, I am going with Providence as going to be one of those teams. I have them advancing to the Sweet 16. And then in the last matchup of the round of 32, we both had Michigan State and Marquette. Who do you have advancing?
I really like Marquette in this matchup. I think Shaka Smart has got Marquette believing. They were also projected to finish 9th in the Big East, and they were able to win their conference tournament. And they boasted a 17-3 record. They're a team that doesn't really lose a lot, and they're pretty battle tested for a Big East team. I like Marquette to advance, even though it's really hard for me to pick against Tom Izzo in March.
And I am going with Tom Izzo in March. And reason being, if I'm not mistaken, Chris, when Shaka Smart was at Texas, I don't believe he won an NCAA tournament game. I know there was a couple of close second losses. I mean, we all remember that half-court buzzer Northern Iowa hit, as well as they got upset in the first round and they lost that by a few points. But I like Michigan State to advance for that reason. I think Tom Izzo, again, battle of coaches, he's got unparalleled experience, and he's got a chip on his shoulder. He's trying to win another ring. Hasn't been able to do so since 2000. So I am going with Michigan State in the Elite Eight, Sweet 16 matchup. We both had Purdue and Duke. Do you think Duke could pull off an upset here?
This was probably the toughest game for me to pick in the entire tournament because I think that Duke's guards can absolutely terrorize the young backcourt that Purdue has fielded all season long. And the reason why I'm going to pick Purdue is Matt Painter's a little bit more experienced as a head coach, has been in situations like this a time or two before. I think John Shire, I think if this was like Coach K, I think I might pick Duke, but I think coaching at this stage in the game is going to start mattering a little bit more. I like Purdue over Duke for that reason.
And I am going with the Duke Blue Devils to upset Purdue here in the Sweet 16. One name I didn't mention earlier, of course, I mentioned Filipowski. Jeremy Roach. I think he went off in the AC tournament final against UVA. I think he's going to be able to do the same thing. You look at Purdue. I mean, I think they're a worse team than they were last year, Chris, when they got upset by St. Peter's. They had Jaden Ivey, who was a lottery pick. That's a big loss. I think they just had more experienced guard play. I think they're able to get it done the first two games, but I actually think Purdue is probably of the one seeds the most likely to be upset early, and I'm going to go with that here. I'm going with Duke over Purdue to go to the Elite Eight. In the other Sweet 16 matchup, I had Michigan State and Providence. You had Kansas State and Marquette, if I'm not mistaken, so completely opposite there. Who do you have advancing?
Yeah. I've got Marquette over Kansas State. I think Marquette, a little bit more firepower and a little bit more talent, and that's going to lift them over Kansas State.
Got Providence and Michigan State, of course, an 11 and 7 rather, if it were to happen. I am going with Michigan State. I think this is another year where Tom Izzo has a run, a Cinderella run in the tournament, and I think Michigan State is going to advance to the Elite Eight. So in our Elite Eight, I had Duke and Michigan State. Who did you have in your matchup?
I've got Purdue and Marquette, 1-2. I'm kind of lame.
And who do you have advancing?
I've actually got Marquette, and I think that in order for Marquette to advance, the Big East Player of the Year and Tyler Kolek, he's going to have a big tournament. I think he can really benefit off of Purdue's young backcourt core because he's averaging a couple steals a game. He distributes the ball very well on offense. He's a really complete player, and I think that he's going to be able to capitalize off that enough for Marquette to bounce Purdue in the Elite Eight and make it to the Final Four. I'm a Shaka believer. I think he's back.
I have Duke and Michigan State. I am going with Duke to advance to the Final Four. By the way, it would be the second straight year that both of these teams have played. And actually, if I remember correctly, I know it's not Coach K, but you look at Tom Izzo versus Coach K in their careers. I think Coach K was like 11-2 against Tom Izzo. I think that's going to carry over in this matchup. Tom Izzo, for whatever reason, just can't seem to figure out Duke. So I will have the Blue Devils advancing to the Final Four. So another region where we disagree. I am going with the 5-seeded Duke to make the Final Four in Houston. Chris is going with the 2-seeded Marquette to make the Final Four. So I guess any last thoughts on this region before we move to our last one in the West?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that out of all the one seeds, Purdue is the one that is most likely to get bounced in the early rounds. I think Duke is really good. I think they're underseeded. I'm a big believer in Marquette, and I think that there are a lot of like really interesting, like the 5-12, the 6-11, the 7-10. A lot of those can go either way.
I agree with you. I mean, I think, like I said, Purdue could be upset, and I don't know. I just tend to think some of these historic programs that are underseeded could end up going far in the tournament. Teams like Duke. We both agree probably shouldn't have been a 5 seed. Michigan State, they've been known to make Cinderella runs being underseeded. USC, I mean, people could forget a couple years ago, USC made a good run in the tournament. So I just think this region has a good mix of kind of those storylines to where you can kind of another region like the Midwest where you could say, you know what, there probably could be or they might be, some of these lower seeded teams end up making a run, knocking off a team or two or even three. Potentially in the tournament. But let's now go to the West region, our last region to dissect. Number 1 seed is the defending champion Kansas, led by Jalen Wilson, one of the best players in college basketball. Do you think Kansas can beat Howard, a school we're both familiar with, which of course is in DC?
Yeah, as great of a story as Howard is, I'm going to go with the Jayhawks. Just not really much to say.
Yeah, I believe Howard's last NCAA tournament appearance was 92, so over 30 years ago. But I'm sorry, they got no shot against Kansas. So I'm going with the Jayhawks. 8-9 matchup is Arkansas and Illinois. Who do you have advancing this matchup?
I like Arkansas. They've they've made deep tournament runs the last couple of years, and the Mitchell twins are an absolute problem. So I'm gonna, for that reason, go with the Razorbacks.
I am going with Arkansas as well. I kind of just feel like the Fighting Illini under Brian Underwood have underperformed in previous years in the tournament. I know they're not as highly seeded as they were in previous years, but I just think that's going to continue to hinder them in this game, and I'm going with Arkansas to advance to the next round. In this 5-12 matchup, we've got St. Mary's from the West Coast Conference against VCU. You know, we were talking about Shaka Smart earlier. Everyone in the tournament knows VCU because I think it was 2011 when VCU made it to the Final Four. As from the first four to the Final Four, I think they were an 11 seed that year. So they're a 12 seed in this matchup. Do you think VCU can continue that Cinderella theme and knock off St. Mary's?
Yeah, this is probably my A10 bias that's showing a little bit here, but I do have VCU advancing, and I think they've really figured it out since early February. They're led by Ace Baldwin, one of the best defensive players in the country, and I think that he has shown, you know, he's a little bit of a hothead, but he's shown a little bit more maturity as an upperclassman in being able to run VCU and lead them to an A10 title. And I think, you know, the A10 is usually a spooky team. Usually an A10 team will at least win a first round game of the tournament. Richmond did it last year over, I can't even remember who they beat. I think they beat Iowa.
Yep.
And I think VCU will do the same to St. Mary's.
I agree with you. I'm going to show my Virginia bias. VCU advancing over St. Mary's. I just think the West Coast Conference, I mean, there's a reason that two teams made it. It's not that deep of a conference. I am going with the VCU to make it to the second round, 12/5. The next matchup, we've got UConn. Historically, has been a very successful program, won a couple of national championships under Jim Calhoun. We all remember that run they had with Kemba. Against Iona, a team from New York who is led by Rick Pitino. Obviously, there are a lot of rumors going on right now whether or not he'll take the St. John's job or another, Power 5 conference job. Do you think Iona can upset UConn here, or are you going with the Huskies?
I'm going to go with the Huskies. It is interesting because this could be the last dance for Iona with Pitino, and you know, I think they'll play hard with that in mind. But I think UConn, after a really shaky start to conference play, I've liked the way that they've ended their season, and I think that they will advance.
I agree with you. I am going with UConn as well. I just think that, I mean, look, I think it's it's definitely got to be distracting. It can't help when, you know, you're Iona and you've got your coach. You know, there's rumors out there he's going to take another job. I think that's going to affect the psyche of the team. I am going with UConn to advance to the second round. In the next matchup, we've got TCU versus the winner of Arizona and Nevada. Do you think TCU beats either of those two teams?
I do think TCU wins. It is a little bit tough because there's always one of the first four teams, I feel like, always ends up making a deep run. But I think it would come from the other game, maybe from a Pittsburgh or something like that. I like TCU here over both these matchups.
I'm going with TCU as well. And then as we advance to the 3-14 matchup, we've got Gonzaga, led by Mark Few. They've been a perennial, NCAA tournament contender. You know, they've been in the final a couple of years, but haven't been able to win that elusive first championship under Mark Few. Playing against Grand Canyon, do you think Gonzaga makes it out to the second, which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, every year under Mark Few, they've made it at least out of the first round. And who do you have winning?
So I like Gonzaga. I like Gonzaga no matter what over Grand Canyon. But so funny story, Grand Canyon actually landed. I don't know what site they're playing, and they left like all of their equipment back on campus. Like
Wow.
none of it is with them. So they're getting it like overnight shipped so they can play tomorrow. Shout out to the Mid-Major Madness Twitter account for that little tidbit of information. But they're already off the rails. I think Gonzaga wins.
I agree with you, Gonzaga. My friend who does sports betting, he's a big Grand Canyon guy. He was hoping that Grand Canyon would not have to play Gonzaga in the first round matchup, but even he's like, yeah, you know, I think Gonzaga's got the edge. And that's a guy who's watched Grand Canyon, so I'm going with the Zags to advance as well to the round of 32. In the next matchup, 7-10 Northwestern against Boise State. Who do you have advancing in that matchup?
Now, I know I said that little tidbit earlier about Big Ten 7 seeds and how good they are, but I'm actually going to go with Boise State here. I think stylistically they match up a little bit better, and Northwestern. It's been a minute since they've been in the tournament, so and honestly, probably same with Boise, but I'm going to go with the Broncos.
I am also going. I'm going with Northwestern. I think I'm going to continue my theme of seven-seeded Big Ten teams, at least winning one game in the tournament. So I am going with Northwestern to advance. Next matchup: UCLA and UNCA. Mick Cronin, of course, has been at UCLA for a couple of years. Tiger Campbell, one of the best guards in the nation. Do you think UCLA advances to the second round?
Yeah, I do. As I've been able to see UNCA a little bit, here and there, just being in North Carolina and hear about them, and it's a great story. But UCLA, too good and too well coached.
I'm going with UCLA as well to advance to the round of 32. So you look at the second round, we've got I believe we both had Kansas and Arkansas. Who do you have winning this matchup?
I think it's a really intriguing matchup. I think Arkansas can bully Kansas a little bit, but I think that Kansas is just going to have a little bit too much firepower offensively. I think the Mitchell twins have the tendency. I saw them play a little bit when they were at Rhode Island last year. They played Davidson twice and had the tendency to be a little bit undisciplined, get into foul trouble. I think that Sweet 16 or better streak ends with a Kansas victory over Arkansas.
I am also going with Kansas as well to advance. I just think their championship experience isn't enough to get them to the Sweet 16. You look at the next matchup, we both had VCU and UConn. Who do you have winning this matchup?
I would love to continue the Virginia bias, but I think VCU tends to be a little bit undisciplined, and I think that is also what's going to lift UConn over VCU, kind of in the same way Kansas is going to beat Arkansas.
I agree with you. I am going with UConn as well. I think UConn actually, if you look at the you look at the matchups. That they have to play Kansas most likely if they get there. But I think in terms of one of the 4, 5, 6 seeds, they might have the easiest road to get to an Elite Eight. So I am going with UConn over VCU. We both have TCU and Gonzaga in this matchup. Who do you have advancing in this matchup?
I have Gonzaga again as a program. They're usually pretty darn good in the first two rounds, and I think that they'll be able to beat TCU, who's they kind of had an interesting Big 12 tournament too. I think they're like coach left for personal reasons for a little bit, or somebody. I might have to look at my notes again, but I just think Gonzaga a little bit more consistent in the early rounds.
I agree with you. Mark Few can get it done in terms of getting this team to the Sweet 16. I'm going with the Zags to advance over the Hornet Frogs. And then in the last matchup, I believe we both had Northwestern. No, you had Boise State and UCLA. Who do you have advancing in that matchup?
Mick Cronin in March is a really tough guy to coach against. And I think UCLA, despite losing in the Pac-12 championship, I think they really were consistently the best team in the Pac-12 all year. I've got the Bruins advancing.
I believe in Tiger Campbell, rather. I am going with the Bruins over Northwestern. So in our Elite Eight matchups, I believe we both have Kansas and UConn. Who do you have advancing in this matchup to the, whether it's the Sweet 16, who do you have advancing to the Elite Eight?
This is another really brutal one that I just sat on for a long time. I think UConn matches up stylistically really well with Kansas. I'm going to have Kansas advancing, in this one. And I just think it's tough for me to bet against Bill Self in March. He is back, and it seems like he is healthy. So I'm going to go with the Jayhawks.
You took the words right out of my mouth. Bill Self being back is a huge boon, especially late in the tournament. If Kansas is able to get there, I think the Jayhawks advance back to the Elite Eight. And then you have Gonzaga and UCLA. I think it would be, two programs that have been, again, pretty historically successful in this tournament. Would be a great Sweet 16 matchup. Do you have the Zags or the Bruins going to the Elite Eight?
I have the Bruins getting a little bit of revenge over Gonzaga. Jalen Suggs lifted the Zags over UCLA in the Final Four. I believe it was 2 years ago. Yep. I think UCLA was an 11 seed. They're a lot more talented this year. I think that they will beat Gonzaga, get revenge, and advance to the Elite Eight.
Yeah, and people forget that was probably the championship, because you look at the actual championship, Baylor blew out Gonzaga, so that was in many ways the best game of the tournament. I am going with Gonzaga though to get the upper hand again. I think what's going to be tough for UCLA is that they have two starters. One of them is banged up. I think he's going to be back, but another one, their big man, is out for the season. I think that's pretty tough this time of year. Had bad timing. I think the Zags have the experience to make it back to the Elite Eight. So in the Elite Eight, Chris has Kansas and UCLA 1 and 2. Who do you have going to Houston for the Final Four?
I have Kansas advancing to the Final Four. Honestly, more so for Kansas being a little bit more battle tested than UCLA this year. Kansas has 17 quad one wins, and that's the most in the tournament by a pretty large margin. And they're getting everybody's best shot as the defending national champions. All 7 of their losses are against ranked teams. So, the likelihood of them getting bounced early is probably not super high. Maybe they can rest guys. But I've got Kansas for that reason advancing into the Final Four.
I am also going with Kansas to beat Gonzaga, going to the Final Four. I think this is when, again, you mentioned the quad wins, just the level of play in the conferences. I think it's hurt Gonzaga deep in the tournament in previous years. I think it's going to hurt them again. Kansas will go back to the Final Four this year. So there you have it. We made it through all of the brackets. We are at our Final Four projections and our predictions. So, Chris, remind us who you have in your Final Four and who do you have advancing to the championship game.
So in my Final Four, I have Alabama and Marquette. I think the Shaka magic is going to end here. I think Alabama from top to bottom is just too talented for Marquette to kind of shoot by or anything like that. I've got them advancing. And then I think you said it earlier, coaching in March. I've got Kansas over Houston in my other Final Four game, got Kansas advancing to the national championship. I think Houston, I think if this is a team that can do it, it would probably be this squad. But it's like I said, it's tough for me to bet against Bill Self in March. So I got Alabama and Kansas in the net.
So there you go with Chris's pick. I have Alabama and Duke on one side of the bracket. I am going with Roll Tide. I think the Cinderella run ends for Duke here. It'll be the second straight year the Duke Blue Devils lose in the Final Four. We all remember that epic game last year when UNC beat them by 4 to make it to the final, beat Coach K in his last game. But I think Brandon Miller and Alabama, we're going to be talking about Alabama basketball this year instead of Alabama football. I think they've just got more experience, better talent. I'm going with the Crimson Tide to make it to the national championship game. So we both agree on one half of the teams that will make it. On the other half, I have Texas and Kansas. So this is pretty interesting because, Chris had Texas being losing in the second round, and I have them all the way in the Final Four. I am picking, of course, and we remember this is a rematch of the Big 12 tournament final. I am going with Texas again to win this potential Final Four matchup. I just think they have Kansas's number. I think they match up well. They'll have the confidence coming into the game because they blew them out by 20 last time. I am going with the Longhorns to make the national championship game. So there you go. I have Alabama and Texas making the national championship game on April 3rd, Monday. And Chris has Alabama and Kansas, maybe a little bit more of a conventional pick in terms of what people most likely be picking. But Chris, are you going with Alabama or are you picking Kansas to repeat?
I'm picking Kansas to repeat. I think I like a lot. I think I like the roster top to bottom from Kansas a little bit better. I think the Jalen Wilson versus Brandon Miller scoring matchup, I think that's going to be a lot of fun to watch if they were to face each other in the national championship game. But I think that Kansas with Bill Self back, I think that, they're battle tested. They've gotten everybody's best shot all year, 17 quad one wins. Like it's tough for me to count them out, but Alabama, a very talented team, would not surprise me if it went the other way.
So there you go. Chris is picking the Jayhawks to repeat over Alabama. I had Texas and Alabama. Of course, another great matchup if it were to happen, and I might shock you with this one. I am going the Texas Longhorns to win the national championship. Remember the name Marcus Carr. He's going to have a big tournament. I love the players around him with Tyrese Hunter and Christian Bishop, Brock Cunningham. I am picking Texas. Shout out to my man Brian Leonard, high school friend. He went to Texas. I am riding with Brian and the Longhorns to win the national championship. So there you go. We are just over an hour. It seems like it took longer than that, but we were able to get all of our picks, pick by pick, in an hour just about. I am going with Texas to win the national championship. Chris, a little bit more conventional. He's going with Kansas to win the national championship. What do you think, Chris? We just went through all our brackets. What are your kind of immediate thoughts as you dissect your picks? I know you were talking about before we were hopping on, you even changed a few picks here before we started the podcast.
Yeah, and honestly, those were like the games like Purdue and Duke, or like Marquette, Kansas State, Gonzaga, UCLA, a lot of those, Sweet 16 matchups where you have like the number 1 versus number 4. I think that this could be one of the more fun tournaments that we've seen in a long time because of, honestly, we have like some pretty good mid-majors in here where you look at Charleston and you look at FAU and you look at San Diego State that I think are going to mix in well with some of these blue blood powers. And I think there are so many ways that you can go when picking one of these brackets. And I think that that's just what makes March really special.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think what's great about this tournament is that, it's funny because I'm sure you're going to be in a few bracket pools. I'm in a few bracket pools. Oftentimes, the more you know about college basketball, it's very unlikely you're actually going to be right. I actually think more often than not, the top seeds win it. But just in terms of someone winning your bracket, it can be someone who doesn't know college basketball at all, and they're just kind of joining in to be part of I guess popular culture. And so I think that's what just makes this tournament special. And I picked Texas, but I think it's entirely plausible they could lose even in the second round. If they play Texas A&M, that's a tough matchup. I was kind of thinking about it too as you were kind of explaining your analysis. I'm like, he's got a point. A&M second in the SEC regular season and the tournament. That would be a tough matchup. I guess that's a question I wanted to ask you too. As you look at Kansas, at least if you look at their region, is there a team that you're nervous could knock them out early, even if it's not the 2 seed necessarily, but even some of these middle seeded teams?
I honestly think it's UConn. I think that there are so many scoring threats on the Huskies led by Jordan Hawkins. And I think that they have the tendency to turn the ball over a little bit, but teams don't really punish UConn a whole lot. They're a pretty well-coached team. And I think it's good that they're back in the tournament after, I don't remember when the last time they won the national championship, but I know that they won it as a 3 seed a little while back. And it's good that UConn basketball is relevant again for the sport of college basketball in general. And I think Jordan Hawkins was a big part of that team. I just think that they're pretty well balanced. They match up well against Kansas. And I think, I don't know, I think in the West region, I was also reading that I think there are 5 or 6 teams in like the KenPom top 15 or KenPom top 20. It's a totally loaded region. And a lot of people are like, what's going on here? So I think it's going to be when it all shakes out, I think this is the one where you could have some really great games once you start getting into the Sweet 16, Elite 8 kind of range.
I agree with you. It's going to be an impressive tournament, like I talked about. I think Purdue is probably, if I had to say, I think Purdue is the 1 seed that could be upset early, most likely. And I think Arizona is the 2 seed that could be upset most likely early. So, I know for a fact we're going to get our picks wrong, but that's, I think, just what makes the tournament such a beautiful event. Just so special in that way. So, great discussion, of course, on March Madness. Chris, to close out the podcast, I, of course, wanted to ask you a few questions unrelated to March Madness. The first one is Virginia Tech women's basketball. You talk about the job they've done under Kenny Brooks, number 1 seed. They're playing, if they can win the first game on Friday, the first 2 games of the tournament will be in Blacksburg. So I think that's pretty exciting. I'm planning to go to the game Friday, so it'll be great to go to a NCAA tournament game in person. What's been your thoughts on the team? Of course, Liz Kitley, ACC Player of the Year. A pretty dominant run to win the ACC for the first time ever. In fact, it's the first time an ACC school has won football, men's basketball, and women's basketball championships. Of course, we remember men's basketball winning last year. What's been your thoughts? Have you been able to follow the team much? And, man, they're just bringing so much excitement to Blacksburg.
Yeah, I love that Blacksburg gets to host 2 NCAA tournament games. Obviously, I think they'll get by Chattanooga. I love the storyline with Kenny Brooks versus Sean Poppy. I think Liz Kitley and Georgia Amore have gotten the lion's share of the credit, and it's obviously so well deserved. Both of them are ballers, but I think Kiana Traylor as well has been sort of the key X factor in a lot of games. She's a great distributor, tough on the glass, can score if she has to, and then Kayla King as well, emerging as a really, really great 3-point shooting threat. That's going to be a tough out. I think the potential matchup between Virginia Tech and UConn in the Elite 8, I think will determine all right, has Virginia Tech women's basketball, like, have they arrived? Because I think Virginia Tech is the 4th 1 seed. So that means that like UConn is like the best 2 seed. So I think that'll be a really like intriguing potential Elite 8 matchup if both teams can get there, because I think that'll be a good litmus test for where the program is in general.
What are your thoughts on? And I agree with that. I mean, I'm so happy for Kenny Brooks. He seems like a really solid coach and really solid guy on and off the field. You talk about Liz Kill. You talk about Georgia Amore. I mean, she was shooting lights out from 3 during the ACC tournament. What are your chances? What do you think are their chances to win the NCAA tournament? I mean, obviously they'd have to go against South Carolina, most likely if they were to get to such a championship. You mentioned they probably will have to play UConn, the Elite 8. I was looking at the betting odds earlier. Despite the fact that they're a 1 seed, they actually have the 16th best odds to win the whole thing, which I think is kind of disrespectful being a 1 seed, but I think it shows you that even though the Hokies are a 1 seed, they still have a lot to prove. What do you think are their chances to win it all?
If South Carolina wasn't a team, I would think that their chances are pretty good. But I think South Carolina is just on a completely different level than everybody else in women's college basketball right now. I think that would be a really, really tall order, kind of like I don't know, in Oklahoma in softball, or in Alabama, like Bear Bryant, Alabama football, sort of thing, where they're just, by far and away better than everybody else. I'm not saying it's impossible. I mean, anything can happen in March, but I mean, South Carolina is beating teams that we lost to by 50 points, referencing Clemson here. So, I mean, it seems like South Carolina has just torn through women's college basketball all year, and I kind of anticipate them continuing to do the same.
Here's what I will say though. I talked to Evan Hughes, of course, as well, mutual friend of ours, the voice of women's basketball. I asked him, I said, be honest, do you think we could beat South Carolina if we played them? And he said, I believe, honest to God, yes, we are the 2nd best team in America right now. Would it be an upset? Sure. But do I think it could happen? Yes. And it would not surprise him. I believe Evan, he'd shoot straight with me. And I believe the Hokies can win the national championship. At sneak peek, I did have them winning my bracket, but probably because I don't have any money on it. So I'm like, there's nothing to lose. Let me root for the Hokies. So I am going with the Hokies to win the national championship. And I think there's a chance that they could win. So we'll see what happens, of course. I just think it's great for Blacksburg to be able to have at least one team playing in the tournament. Of course, we'll see what happens with men's basketball. They just tipped off here with the NIT. I wanted to ask you, Chris, a couple of non-basketball related questions. I know you're a Commanders fan.
Yep.
What do you think about what they're looking like next year? I mean, they re-signed Deron Payne, made a couple of nice additions to their offensive line. The quarterback situation is still a question mark. They signed Jacoby Brissett today, so you think they might put him in competition with Sam Howell. Of course, they got Eric Bieniemy, the Super Bowl winning offensive coordinator from the Chiefs. Of course, you got Scary Terry McLaurin. I think he's one of the best receivers in the game. Me personally, I think that they should have thrown the farm at Lamar Jackson. I think that would be a great way to actually, honestly, even pull some Ravens fans away from Baltimore and kind of back into the region. I mean, I think that this is a team that's got a lot of good pieces, but they just lack the quarterback. I mean, even with Taylor Heineke and Carson Wentz, they were like a game or so out of missing the playoffs last year. So to me, I think they should have gone after Lamar Jackson, but it doesn't seem like they're doing that as of now. What are your thoughts on the Commanders? What do you think they should do, and what's kind of your ceiling you think for them next year in the playoffs? Can they make the playoffs?
Yeah. I think they can be a fringe playoff team next year for sure, especially with the offensive coordinator addition. I actually had no idea that we signed Brissett today, so it's been a pretty busy 24 hours for me work wise. But Davidson baseball was at Atrium Health Ballpark playing at a pro park, so I was helping out a little bit with that. But that's pretty cool, I guess, to give Sam Howell a little bit of competition. I was sad to see Heineke go, but I know he's an Atlanta guy, so not all that surprised, especially when he got benched at the end of the year. I think I am a little bit upset that we're not targeting a quarterback, whether it's Lamar Jackson, whether it's Derek Carr, even if it's like Aaron Rodgers. We need a veteran quarterback to, I think, elevate us from a very average team to, okay, these guys might be able to be a 4 or 5 seed come the NFL playoffs, maybe host a playoff game, and who knows what happens from there. But I think we saw when we had Alex Smith back in, I want to say it was 2018 or 2019 before he broke his leg. I think we were 6-3 going into that really unfortunate game. And I think when you take a look at the Commanders, I think they would benefit off of giving McLaurin and Curtis Samuel and Josh Dotson some help at the quarterback position.
Yeah,
Or
I mean, I
Jahan
agree with
Dotson,
you.
sorry.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I agree with you. I think they're a fringe playoff team, especially in the NFC, which just quite frankly is not as stacked as the AFC. I think they're making a big mistake not going after Lamar Jackson or really some sort of elite level quarterback. You mentioned Aaron Rodgers. He actually announced on the Pat McAfee show that he wants to be a Jet. So I think it's pretty much going to happen in these next few days to a week. Well, what do you think is the Jets' ceiling with Aaron Rodgers? Do you think they could potentially make a run of the Super Bowl? Because don't forget, I mean, they're in a tough division with Miami if Tua's healthy and that great offense. You've, of course, got Buffalo and even the Pats. I mean, Mac Jones, Bill Belichick brought back Bill O'Brien to actually give him a real offensive coordinator. I don't think you can summarily dismiss the best coach of all time. That's going to be a tough division to start, but what do you think are the Jets' ceiling Super Bowl chances with Aaron Rodgers?
Yeah, that might be the best division in football if Aaron Rodgers actually goes to the Jets, because the Jets have, I think they have the defensive part figured out. They just had no offense last year. Zach Wilson was pretty lifeless, and Mike White, as fun as that was, wasn't able to produce at a playoff or Super Bowl caliber level. I think it's really going to depend on how well they do in the division. I think in a division that's stacked, if they win 4 or 5 games in that division, I think that alone will probably prove them to be Super Bowl worthy. But until they officially sign Aaron Rodgers and until they actually start playing the games, I'm going to hold off on making a bold Jets to the Super Bowl projection.
Yeah, I don't know about you, Chris. I'm actually pessimistic, even if Aaron Rodgers signs with the Jets. I mean, first of all, I'm not saying he's washed, but if you look at the year he had last year, he didn't have a great year, and he's going to be turning 40 this year. I mean, we've only seen one guy in Tom Brady be able to be successful over the age of 40. So you've got that going for you. And apparently now, I mean, he's trying to tell the Jets, hey, you got to recruit all these guys. You got to recruit Alan Lazard and Randall Cobb, of course, who were his teammates with the Packers. And, look, they didn't make the playoffs with those guys on the team. So what do you think? What makes you think that if you get those guys to the Jets, all of a sudden you're going to be better and Super Bowl contender? You mentioned the tough division, the tough conference. I mean, you look at it, Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, Pat Mahomes. I mean, you go to the AFC, Trevor Lawrence, Joe Burrow. You are going into the stacked conference. I mean, to me personally, if he wants to win a Super Bowl, I think he should stay with the Packers. But if he's, from what it appears, hell bent on going to the Jets, I don't know. I have to see it to believe it. Obviously, look at Brady and Stafford. They won the Super Bowl with a different team, but I'd have to see it to believe it with Aaron Rodgers. So definitely see what happens there. My final question for you, Chris, of course, we are almost an hour and 20 minutes into this podcast, is what do you think is the future for Virginia Tech football? I mean, I'm sure you followed the team this year. Even from Davidson. I think Brent Pry is the right guy for the job. I really like his attitude. He seems to ingratiate himself with the community, something that I don't think Justin Fuente did a great job of doing. But, I think it's going to take him a few years probably to get his recruits in and really be able to make a difference. You also look at the future of college football. I mean, with these conference realignment teams going to the Big Ten and SEC, really seems like the ACC rather could be rendered irrelevant here pretty soon. But then they are expanding the playoff here to 12 teams, not this coming year, but the following year. So what do you think is the future for Virginia Tech football? Are you confident that they can at least get back to maybe contending for a playoff spot? I mean, once this field expands to 12?
I mean, I'm a tried and true Hokie, so I'm always going to believe, but the last year was really tough. And I don't really think that's on Brent Pry at all. I just think we didn't have a very talented roster at all. I know that Brent Pry has been hitting the portal, and there's some young guys on the squad that I think, especially on the defensive side, that have grown up a little bit this year in that game. And I like the way that they ended the season against Liberty. Liberty was no slouch, and especially to go on the road and beat them, I think was an impressive win and a confidence building win going into the offseason. But I am really worried about both NIL and conference realignment. Kind of like you said, what if Clemson leaves, or what if Florida State leaves, and all of a sudden you have the Big Ten and the SEC that are just going to compete with each other, and then everyone else is just kind of thrown out to the side. I think that's worrisome potentially in the long term. But I think if Brent Pry can get the right guys, he's proven that he can coach, especially defensively. I think he's just got to get the right staff around him who want to stay, and he's going to have to dominate the portal maybe this year and next year while he's kind of recruiting his guys.
I agree with you. I mean, you even look at next year's home schedule. I mean, there's really not any great home games to look forward to. I mean, I think Syracuse, a Thursday night, might be the best one you could make an argument for, but it just seems like, we're in the long run in terms of it's going to be a long-term process to try to rebuild Virginia Tech football. I think Brent Pry is the right guy for the job, but we'll see what happens with that. And actually, I did also want to ask you about men's basketball because we didn't really have a chance to talk about them. Obviously, it is a disappointing season. I mean, you look at it; they started 11-1. And I think they were 1-7 in one possession games in the ACC. So I mean, look, you win a couple of those games, your fortune is probably better, and you're probably in the NCAA tournament. But I guess I wanted to ask you, how disappointing was this season? Because we came into the season as the defending ACC tournament champions. But a friend mentioned this to me, and I think it's well put. Of like, look, if Darius Maddox doesn't make that shot last year in the first round against Clemson, that we don't have all these expectations going into the season. So where do you kind of fall on that balance in terms of how disappointed were you, and how confident are you that Mike Young can get this program back on track and get back to being a regular NCAA participant?
Yeah, I think if Mike Young wants to get him on track, it's probably got to happen, if not next year, the year after that. Or I think he could start getting into some trouble. I think if you take that ACC run away, I believe we are below 500 in the ACC in Mike Young's tenure. I think it's been a tough road in conference, and I honestly kind of compare in one possession game stat. Davidson lost 9 straight games at one point this season, decided by 5 points or less. They were in a dogfight every game, and they lost every single time. I don't really think that there's an issue with how hard the guys that are playing. I saw, some Twitter comments here and there talking about like, oh, Justin Mutt seems checked out or whatever. I think people are competing and they're playing hard, but I think their teams are running into teams where their players are just better, and we're just going to have to recruit better if we're going to be a relevant tournament team year in and year out, instead of hey, every 4 or 5 years we might have a couple good ones, but they're going to be bad outside of that.
I agree with you. I mean, what I hope is that Hunter Couture and Grant Basile, they are eligible to come back a year. If they can come back, I think that definitely gives a boost to the Hokies because, you got Sean Padula. I think that, with another year of experience, he's going to be better. I just think people underestimate the losses that we had with Storm Murphy and Kebe Luma. I mean, Kebe Luma was a guy who you could just get an easy bucket. He could make things happen in the post, especially, and shoot the three. And then Storm Murphy, I think, was just better than Sean Padula. He had the experience. I think he was just better with protecting the basketball. So I think people forget. And then also Naheem Aline. I mean, he was a guy who was a great player who transferred. He was a really good stretch for, and we lost Darius Maddox for a good portion of the season. So, I'm confident in Mike Young. I think he's a really good guy like Kenny Brooks, and I think he can get the program back on track. But, I think the fact that, look, I mean, since our freshman year, Chris, I was thinking about this. This is the first year that the Hokies did not make the NCAA tournament since our freshman year. Now, they weren't going to make the tournament if COVID hadn't happened in 2020, but I kind of consider that a wash because it was COVID. So really, I mean, this is the first year in 8 years that they did not make the NCAA tournament. So it was disappointing, but I think that he can get him back on track. But it's important that he starts to try to do that next year, and we can get back on track soon. But man, Chris, this has been such a pleasure. It's always great catching up with you, talking about March Madness. Second straight year we've done this, so kind of seems like a tradition. And getting to hear all the great stuff you're doing at Davidson, it's always a pleasure to get the chance to catch up with you and talk March Madness.
I appreciate that, Billy. That means a lot, and really grateful for our friendship. I always love talking about college basketball. It doesn't matter what time of year, who it's with. I love coming on this podcast and just chopping it up.
For sure. Well, thank you so much to Chris Finch, video coordinator at Davidson Athletics and Hokie alum, for joining me on the latest edition of the Pulse with BP. There you have it, folks. We gave you all of our predictions pick by pick for the March Madness 2023 bracket. We hope you enjoyed the tournament. Have a lot of fun watching these games. We'll see you next time. Have a great one. And this has been the latest edition of the Pulse with BP.